Okay, this is macro review 1. This is a brief review, not a detailed review of everything from unit 1 macro, and see if we can get to unit 2. So the first place we start off is our first graph, production possibilities curve, also known as production possibilities frontier. You've got usually capital goods and consumer goods, or guns or butter, or apples and oranges, whatever a society can produce. This is just a graph to show us concepts, to demonstrate concepts from Unit 1. What are those concepts? You need to know the definition of economics, and then the concepts here are also opportunity cost, trade-off, scarcity, and efficiency. So know those definitions. I'm not going to go over them now. Look them up if you don't already have them. So there's three things that we can see. We have 3 points A, B, and C. A demonstrates a point of inefficiency, and then B is efficiency, getting the most we can from our scarce resources. And then C is impossible to produce with the given resources that society has. So what does the PPC show us? It shows us the trade-off. A society can make either consumer goods, they can make more consumer goods if they give up some capital goods, or they can make more capital goods if they give up some consumer goods, or apples and oranges, or guns and butter, or something like that. So that's what it demonstrates for us, and you have to be able to know how to manipulate this. The shifters of the PPC are the same shifters from units 3 and 4 of the long-run aggregate supply. So I put an asterisk down there to remind you. What are the shifters of the PPC? Quantity and quality of resources. If they get better, the PPC can shift outward and increase. If something happens negatively towards them, then it will decrease. Technology and productivity are the other two shifters, and within productivity is any type of investment spending. If investment spending goes up, we're going to see future growth in the PPC. If investment spending declines, we might see less growth, or maybe even a smaller amount of growth, or maybe even the economy will shrink, and we'll be able to produce less in society. Okay? Inside the graph, if we're inside the graph, it's usually a sign of a recession or unemployment going up. Outside the graph could be doesn't really happen, right? We can't produce out there unless we change the resources. So like pizza. The only way the society, for example, can make more pizza is if they buy more pizza ovens. Pizza is a resource. That will be an investment. Society can consume outside of their PPF only if they trade, okay, given the resources that they have. All right, that's the first part. The second part we're going to talk about is connected to the previous unit, is comparative and absolute advantage. What is an absolute advantage between countries that are trading? Absolute advantage means that we produce more of a good than someone else, or we produce more with less resources. Comparative advantage means that we give up less of the other good than another country does. So a comparative advantage, you can only get an advantage if you're comparing what you're producing. So if we both produce the same good, right, we both produce cars, but for me to produce one car, I give up one computer. For you to produce one car, you give up 3 computers, then I have a smaller opportunity cost. I give up less than you do, so therefore I'm going to produce cars, you're probably going to produce more computers if we're going to trade. So that's how it works. There are 2 types of questions here, input questions and output questions. Input questions what does that mean? It means less inputs to produce one good. Right? If we're talking about inputs, we're talking about a country or an economy that can produce something in less time than the other country, with less workers than the other country, or with less acres to produce a bushel, or something like that. Less inputs, right? Is generally inputs. We're talking about input type questions. Okay. With input questions, we have other goes under. That's what we're going to show you in a second on how to do comparative advantage questions. If it's an output question, it's pretty simple. If you produce more, if we're talking about the total number of goods, it's an output question. So more cars, more computers, more cantaloupes in a day, in a month, in a year, however long unit of time, that is an output question. Why is that important? Important because you may get a comparative advantage question, and the first thing you got to do is figure out, is it an input question or an output question? So let's look at the first one. You have Japan and the United States, and the United States and Canada for these examples. And you got to figure out which one's an input question and which one's an output question. Well, to do that, you got to look up here. Number of workers to produce one car, number of workers to produce one motorcycle. Or total number of cars in one day, total number of motorcycles in one day. Which one's an input, which one's an output? Well, if we're producing one good, right, how many workers it takes to produce one good, then this is going to be an input question. Whereas here, it's the total number of cars in 1 day, 1 hour, 1 year. This one's going to be an output question. Why is that important? Well, if it's an input question, you're going to do other goes under. If it's an output question, you're going to do other goes over. What does that mean? Well, let's compare. In this example, this is cars and motorcycles. The input question, we're going to do other goes under. So for Japan, they can produce 8 workers produce 1 car, or 4 workers can produce 1 motorcycle. So I want to find out how much it costs, right? How many motorcycles do I give up for 1 car? So I take the other and I go under 8 over 4. So 1 car costs 2 motorcycles. If I want to find out how many motorcycles are given up to produce, how many cars you give up to produce 1 motorcycle, in the time it took me to produce 1 motorcycle, I could have produced other goes under 4 divided by 8. So 1/2 of a car. That's the reciprocal. See if you do the next one. So other goes under. 1 car for the U.S. will cost, other goes under, 10 over 2, 5 motorcycles, and you can just reverse it. 1 motorcycle costs 1/5 of a car. Now you can correctly figure out who has the opportunity cost, right? We know that the absolute advantage, that we can figure out by who has the smallest number here or the largest number here. So absolute advantage, who uses less inputs? Japan uses less inputs to make a car. Who uses less inputs for motorcycles? Looks like the U.S. So they would have the absolute advantage. U.S. has absolute advantage in motorcycle. Japan has absolute advantage in cars. But the comparative advantage means we have to compare who gives up. And whoever gives up less should produce that good. So who should produce cars? Well, the U.S. gives up 2 motorcycles. Japan gives up 2 motorcycles. The U.S. gives up 5. So Japan has the comparative advantage. They're going to produce cars. And if one of them it's going to be the opposite for the other country. But let's pretend we don't know that. Who gives up less cars per 1 motorcycle? Japan gives up 1/2 a car. The United States is 1/5, which is smaller. So Japan is going to produce cars. The U.S. is going to produce motorcycles. For the next one, this is other goes over because it's an output question. So for this one, we do the same thing. Who has the absolute advantage first? Well, the U.S. produces more cars and the U.S. produces more motorcycles. So the U.S. has the absolute advantage in both. But who has the comparative advantage? For this one, because it's an output question, we're going to do other goes over. So I want to find out how much it costs to produce 1 car. So 1 car costs other goes over. 50 over 100, 1/2 of a motorcycle. 1 motorcycle costs 2 cars. For Canada, other goes over. 1 car is going to cost 20 over 80. 1/4 of a motorcycle. And 1 motorcycle is going to cost 4 cars. Now I can figure out who has the comparative advantage. Who should produce cars? Whichever one is smaller. So Canada should produce cars because they give up less motorcycle. And the United States should produce motorcycles because they give up less car. 2 is smaller than 4. The last thing you need to know, the last type of question you can get is called a terms of trade question. This should help you figure out a terms of trade that is acceptable for both countries. If I want to say, well, how many of 1 car, for the U.S., right, they can produce 1 car, or they can produce 2 motorcycles. So they'll only be willing to trade 1 car for more than 2 motorcycles. That's for Japan. For the U.S., they produce, So we're going to look at these opportunity costs and say a successful terms of trade will be any number in between here. 1 car for anything between 2 and 5. So we'll say 4. 1 car for 4 motorcycles is a successful trade for both countries. Both countries would accept that. If you want to look at the other side and do the other way around, well, we can do they'll trade 1 motorcycle for somewhere between 1/2 of a car and 1/5. So we can say 1/3, right? So 1 motorcycle for 1/3 of a car. That would also be an acceptable trade. Acceptable trade for both. Do the same thing over here. All right, but we won't do that now. All right. Part of Unit 1 has to do with one of my favorite topics, supply and demand. And first thing I'm going to do is look at demand. You have to know the definition and law of demand, right? Price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. That's the law of demand. Similar to the law of supply, the opposite. When price goes up, quantity supplied increases. Price goes down, quantity supplied decreases. So let's look at demand first. It's a downward sloping negative curve. Why? If price and quantity are your x and y axis, y and x axis, there are three reasons why demand is downward sloping. You got to know them. You're going to get a question on them on the AP exam. The wealth effect, interest rate effect, and diminishing marginal utility. If you don't know them, look them up. The shifters of demand are as follows: income, price of related goods, taste, expectations, and number of buyers. In prices of related goods, please don't forget things like complementary goods and substitute goods. All right, don't forget things like inferior goods and normal goods. All right, if you don't know what those are, look them up under price of related goods. In general, a shift to the right for any curve is an increase. A shift to the left is a decrease. Please know the difference between a movement along a curve where the quantity demanded increases, where the quantity demanded decreases because of a price change. Okay, price change only moves along a curve. Shifters actually shift the entirety of the curve. Okay? For supply, it works the same way, except that now we have an upward sloping. Over here, demanders are consumers. Sorry, I'm not writing neatly. But S stands for, in this case, suppliers or producers. So you have to think like a producer. What does a producer want to do? They want to produce goods, and they want to make money. In order for them to make money, they got to produce goods at a price that is above how much it costs them to make it. So, as price rises, suppliers are willing to supply more. The quantity supplied increases. As price goes down, suppliers are like, I'll go produce something else, or I just won't produce anything because it's not worth my time. So, why does it slope upward? It slopes upward because sellers, they produce more, they can make more profit. If I all of a sudden told you lemonade sold for $1, one person maybe in the room would say, I'll sell lemonade, no problem. If all of a sudden the temperature went up 100 degrees the next day, then what could you do? You have a lot more demand. So you say, you know what? I'm going to start selling my lemonade for $10 a pop. It's fresh lemonade. All of a sudden, people would come out of the woodwork. I'll sell lemonade too. No problem. The price is up because there's profit motive, profits to be made. So the shifters of supply, things that shifted to the right, an increase, a left, a decrease. Input prices. Input prices are the number one shifter. The price of labor goes up. The price of resources goes up. That's going to shift supply to the left. The price of labor goes down, shifts supply to the right. Technology usually increases supply, unless it's like a computer virus, then it shifts supply to the left. Expectations, opportunity cost of alternative production. That's a tricky one. I go over it in my old video. Please check it out on supply and demand. And then the last one, government action, taxes or subsidies. Taxes shift supply to the left, subsidies shift supply to the right. That's what you got to know for macro. Quantity supplied and a shift in supply also is the same thing for demand. Right? A quantity supplied is caused by a change in price. A change in price does not shift the curve. That's important for economics. All right, that's Unit 1.